If I ever write a memoir, it'll be called How to Fix Everything Except Your Marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me as I crouched under our kitchen sink at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, wrestling with a leaky pipe that had been dripping for 3 weeks. Janelle had mentioned it exactly once, then left it for me to handle. Like everything else. The house felt hollow these days. Our daughter Emma was away at college, and the silence between Janelle and me had grown thick enough to cut with a wrench. I'd been working night shifts at the structural planning office, coming home to an empty bed and cold dinners wrapped in plastic. That's when I heard her car in the driveway. I glanced at the kitchen clock, 11:47 p.m., another late meeting with her event planning team. Janelle had been pulling these extended hours for months now, always with some urgent client crisis or last-minute venue change. Her company, Elite Events Boston, was supposedly booming. The front door opened with that particular careful quiet of someone trying not to wake a sleeping spouse. I stayed under the sink, listening to her heels click across the hardwood floor. Designer heels, I noticed. When had she started wearing those to work? Adrian? Her voice carried that forced brightness she used when she felt guilty about something. You still up? Under here, I called back, not bothering to crawl out. Pipe finally gave up the ghost. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, and I caught a whiff of expensive perfume. Not the vanilla stuff she usually wore, something heavier, more sophisticated. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour, and her makeup looked freshly applied rather than worn down by a 14-hour workday. Poor baby, she said, though I couldn't tell if she meant me or the pipe. I'll just head up to bed. Early morning tomorrow. I watched her leave, noting the way she clutched her purse against her chest like it contained state secrets. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. Call it structural engineer instincts. When something doesn't add up, you investigate before the whole thing comes crashing down. 20 minutes later, I'd fixed the leak and headed upstairs. Janelle was already in bed, facing away from me, her breathing too controlled to be genuine sleep. I brushed my teeth and slipped under the covers, staring at the ceiling and wondering when we'd become strangers sharing a mortgage. That's when I saw it. On my nightstand, right next to my reading glasses and the bottle of Advil I kept for morning headaches, sat a men's watch. Not just any watch, a Rolex Submariner with a distinctive black face and steel bracelet, the kind of timepiece that cost more than I made in 3 months. I picked it up, feeling its weight. Heavy, expensive, warm like it had recently been worn. The back was engraved, "To Martin, all my love, A." "Janelle," I said quietly. She stirred, made a sleepy sound. Whose watch is this?" She rolled over, blinking in the dim light from my phone screen. When she saw what I was holding, something flickered across her face. Panic, maybe, or calculation. "Oh, that," she said, sitting up and running a hand through her hair. "My coworker dropped it at work today. I told him I'd return it tomorrow." I turned the watch over in my hands. Must be some coworker. This thing's worth $5,000 easy. "Is it?" She reached for it, but I didn't let go. "I wouldn't know. I just grabbed it off the conference room table when he left it behind." "Uh-huh." I set the watch back down, noting how her eyes tracked its movement. Because nothing screams lost and found like a $5,000 Rolex next to my mouthguard. She laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're being paranoid. It's just a watch, Adrian." "Just a watch," I repeated. "From Martin." Her face went carefully blank. "How do you know his name?" "It's engraved on the back. To Martin, all my love, A." Thoughtful of A, whoever that is. Janelle was quiet for a long moment. Then, "He's our new creative director, Martin Kessler. Really nice guy, very professional. His wife probably gave him that for their anniversary or something. And he just left it in your conference room. People forget things all the time." I nodded slowly, watching her face in the blue glow of my phone. "Sure they do. Well, Make sure you get it back to him tomorrow. Wouldn't want Martin to think we're the kind of people who keep things that don't belong to us." She settled back down, pulling the covers up to her chin. "Of course. Good night, Adrian." "Good night." But I didn't sleep. I lay there thinking about expensive watches and late meetings and perfume I didn't recognize. About the way she'd said Martin's name, carefully, like she was handling something fragile. About how someone forgets a $5,000 watch, but remembers to put on fresh makeup at midnight. By morning, I'd made a decision. If Janelle was hiding something, I was going to find out what. I'd spent 20 years analyzing structural weaknesses for a living. Time to put those skills to work on my marriage. The watch was gone when I woke up. The thing about being a structural engineer is that you learn to see the cracks before the building falls down. You notice when load-bearing walls start to shift, when foundations settle unevenly, when the whole structure becomes unstable. My marriage had been showing stress fractures for months, but I'd been too busy or too willfully blind to pay attention. Now, I was paying attention to everything. Janelle left for work that morning in a black dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled in loose waves that took time and effort. She kissed my cheek, a brief, distracted peck, and said she'd be home late again. Another client dinner, this one with the Pemberton wedding party. "On a Wednesday?" I asked. "They're only available weeknights," she said, not meeting my eyes. "You know how these society types are." I watched her drive away in her silver Audi, then called my sister Cassie. "I need a favor," I said when she picked up. "Let me guess. Janelle's acting weird, and you want me to tell you you're being paranoid." Cassie owned a boxing gym in Southie and had the kind of street smarts that came from growing up in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business. She'd never particularly liked Janelle, though she'd been diplomatic about it for the sake of family peace. "Maybe not so paranoid," I said, and told her about the watch. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Adrian, honey, when was the last time you and Janelle had closeness?" The question caught me off guard. What does that have to do with anything? Everything. Trust me on this one. I thought about it. Really thought about it. "Christmas," I said finally. "Maybe New Year's. It's April, Adrian. I know what month it is. Do you? Because your wife is coming home at midnight wearing designer clothes and expensive perfume, and you're asking me about watches. The watch isn't the problem. The watch is evidence. Evidence." The word hit me like a cold slap. "You think she's—" "I think you need to stop asking me what I think and start finding out what you know." After I hung up, I sat in my truck outside the office building where I'd worked for 15 years, watching normal people live their normal lives. Commuters with coffee and newspapers, construction workers heading to job sites, office workers checking their phones as they walked. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. I'd met Janelle at a company Christmas party 8 years ago. She was working for a smaller event firm then, handling corporate functions and charity galas. Smart, funny, ambitious, the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. She'd laughed at my jokes about load calculations and beam stress, made me feel like the most interesting man at the party. The first few years were good, great even. We bought the house in Medford, had Emma, built what I thought was a solid life together. Janelle's career took off when she joined Elite Events 3 years ago, and I was proud of her success, proud to be married to a woman who could coordinate million-dollar weddings and corporate retreats. But success came with longer hours, weekend work, networking events I wasn't invited to. Gradually, we'd become ships passing in the night, her rushing off to venue visits and client meetings, me handling the day-to-day maintenance of our life. I told myself it was temporary, that things would settle down once she established herself. Now I wondered if I'd been lying to myself about more than just the temporary part. That evening, I stopped at Best Buy on the way home. The kid behind the counter couldn't have been more than 20, with sleeve tattoos and gauged ears that would have horrified my mother. You want to monitor what exactly? He asked when I explained what I needed. My house, I said, for security purposes. He nodded knowingly. Right, security. You want something discreet? Very. 20 minutes later, I walked out with a wireless camera system small enough to hide in a picture frame. The kid, Tyler, according to his name tag, had been surprisingly helpful once he understood I wasn't trying to spy on neighbors or tenants. The motion activation is super sensitive, he'd explained, and the app lets you monitor everything from your phone. Just, make sure you're not violating any laws, you know? It's my house, I'd said. Cool. Then you're good to go. Installing the camera took less than an hour. I positioned it inside an old picture frame on our dresser, angled to capture most of the bedroom. The lens was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look, and the frame looked like every other piece of furniture Janelle had arranged with her usual eye for design. I tested it from my phone, watching myself move around the room like some kind of suburban spy. The image quality was surprisingly good, and the audio pickup was crystal clear. If Janelle brought anyone into our bedroom, I'd know about it. Part of me hoped I was wrong, hoped I'd review days of footage showing nothing more than my wife getting dressed for work and falling asleep alone. Hoped the watch had really belonged to some forgetful coworker and my imagination was running wild. But a bigger part of me, the part that analyzed structural failures for a living, already knew what I was going to find. Janelle came home at 11:15 that night, claiming the Pemberton dinner had run late. She smelled like wine and that same expensive perfume, and her hair was slightly mussed despite the careful styling from that morning. How was dinner? I asked from the couch, where I'd been pretending to watch the Red Sox game. Long, she said, kicking off her heels. Mrs. Pemberton has very specific ideas about floral arrangements. We must have looked at 50 different centerpiece options. Sounds exhausting. It was. She paused at the bottom of the stairs. I'm going to take a shower and head straight to bed. Another early morning tomorrow. I listened to the water running upstairs and checked my phone. The camera app showed our empty bedroom, waiting. Tomorrow, I'd start getting answers. I just wasn't sure I was ready for them. The first week of surveillance yielded nothing but mundane footage of Janelle getting ready for work and coming home to an empty house. I began to think Cassie was wrong, that my imagination had gotten the better of me. Maybe the watch really had belonged to a careless coworker. Maybe I was just a paranoid husband looking for problems that didn't exist. Then Friday happened. I was reviewing the previous night's footage during my lunch break, fast-forwarding through hours of an empty bedroom when the motion sensor triggered at 2:17 p.m. I was at work, so it should have been nothing. Maybe the cat jumping on the bed or a tree branch casting shadows through the window. Instead, I watched my wife enter the frame with a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, well-dressed, probably mid-40s with the kind of confident bearing that came from money and success. Dark hair, expensive suit, the same watch I'd found on my nightstand. They were laughing about something, comfortable with each other in a way that made my stomach clench. I turned up the volume on my phone, grateful for Tyler's high-quality audio equipment. Can't believe Adrian actually bought that story about the conference room, Janelle was saying as she sat on our bed, my side of the bed, and started unbuttoning her blouse. You did lay it on a bit thick, the man replied. His voice was smooth, educated, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. A Rolex in the lost and found. Really, Janelle? It worked, didn't it? He's so trusting it's almost pathetic. She stood up, letting her blouse fall to the floor. Besides, he's been working those night shifts for months. I don't think he'd notice if I brought a marching band home. The man, Martin, I realized, moved closer to her. What if he finds out? He won't. Adrian sees what he wants to see, and what he wants to see is his perfect little suburban life staying exactly the same forever. She laughed, but there was cruelty in it I'd never heard before. Do you know he still leaves me little notes in my lunch, like we're teenagers? My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I watched this stranger touch my wife in our bedroom, listened to her mock the notes I'd been writing since we first started dating. 20-minute love letters condensed into post-it reminders that I was thinking of her. "Poor Adrian," Martin said, and they both laughed. I stopped the video. For a long moment, I sat in my truck in the parking lot of a Dunkin' Donuts, staring at my phone screen and trying to process what I'd just seen. 20 years of marriage, 8 years of what I'd thought was happiness, reduced to a punchline about my trusting nature. The rational part of my brain cataloged the evidence. Janelle was having an affair with Martin Kessler, who was almost certainly her boss at elite events. They'd been meeting in our house while I worked night shifts. She'd been lying about client dinners and late meetings for months. The emotional part of my brain was screaming. I called Cassie. "I was right, wasn't I?" she said instead of hello. "Yeah." "How bad?" "Bad." I told her about the footage, about the things Janelle had said, about the casual cruelty in her voice when she'd mocked my lunch notes. Cassie was quiet for a long time. Then, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." "Bullshit. You're a planner, Adrian. You don't do anything without thinking it through first. So what's the plan?" I looked across the parking lot at a young couple sharing coffee and laughing at something on their phones. They looked happy, uncomplicated, like people who still believed in love and trust and all the things I'd apparently been naive enough to take for granted. "I need more evidence," I said finally. "If I'm going to blow up my life, I want to make sure I do it right." "Now you're talking. What do you need?" "Information. About Martin Kessler, about elite events, about how long this has been going on, and I need to know what my legal options are." "I know a guy," Cassie said. "Private investigator, used to be a cop. Discreet, professional, won't charge you an arm and a leg. Want me to set up a meeting?" "Yeah. And Cassie, don't tell anyone about this yet. Not even Mom. Your secret's safe with me. But Adrian, when you're ready to burn it all down, I'll be right there with the gasoline." That weekend, I met with Cassie's private investigator, a former Boston PD detective named Frank Torino, who looked like he'd stepped out of a Raymond Chandler novel. Thick Boston accent, tired eyes, the kind of guy who'd seen every possible way people could betray each other. "Cheating spouse," he said after I'd explained the situation. "Story as old as time. You got footage?" I showed him clips from the camera, watching his expression remain professionally neutral as he took notes. "This Martin guy, you know his last name?" "Kessler. He's her boss at elite events." Frank nodded. "That complicates things legally. Boss-employee relationships, especially when one person's married, can create liability issues for the company." "How long you been married?" 20 years total, 8 since we bought the house together." "Kids?" "One daughter, 18, away at college." "Assets?" I told him about the house, our retirement accounts, Janelle's car lease, the small investment portfolio we'd built together. Nothing spectacular, but enough to make divorce proceedings complicated. "Here's what I can do," Frank said, sliding a contract across the coffee shop table. "I'll run a full background check on Martin Kessler, see what his situation is, married, divorced, financial issues, whatever. I'll also dig into elite events, see if there's a pattern of this kind of behavior, and I'll document your wife's activities for the next few weeks, establish a timeline for when this affair started." "How much?" $2,000 plus expenses. Cash up front." I thought about the money we'd been saving for a vacation to Ireland, the trip Janelle had been planning for our anniversary. "Do it." "One more thing," Frank said as I signed the contract. "You seem like a decent guy, so I'm going to give you some free advice. When this comes out, and it will come out, your wife's going to try to make you the bad guy. She'll say you were neglectful, that you drove her to it, that you violated her privacy by recording her. Don't let her flip the script. You're not the one who brought another man into your marriage bed." I shook his hand, feeling like I'd just hired my own personal angel of vengeance. "How long before you have something?" Give me a week. Maybe less if I get lucky. That night, I lay in bed next to my wife, listening to her breathe and wondering how many lies she'd told me. How many client dinners had actually been hotel rooms? How many times had she and Martin laughed about my trusting nature? But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I was a structural engineer, and I knew that if you're going to bring down a building, you have to be strategic about where you place the charges. I was going to bring down her whole world, but first, I needed to make sure I had enough evidence to bury them both. Frank Torino called me on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing blueprints for a new office complex downtown. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was literally building something while my personal life crumbled. "We need to meet," he said. "I've got information you're going to want to see." An hour later, we sat in the same coffee shop where I'd hired him, a manila folder thick with documents spread between us. "Martin Kessler," Frank began, pulling out an 8/10 photograph. 45 years old, married to Alyssa Kessler for 16 years, 2 kids in private school, lives in a $1 million condo in Back Bay, drives a BMW, belongs to an exclusive country club. I studied the photo. It was definitely the man from my bedroom footage, but seeing him in a professional headshot made it somehow worse. He looked successful, confident, like a man who was used to taking what he wanted. "Here's where it gets interesting," Frank continued. "Elite Events is a subsidiary of Kessler Holdings. Martin doesn't just work there, his family owns the company. So Janelle is sleeping with her boss, who's also the owner. Gets better. I talked to a former employee, woman named Rebecca Chen, who used to work in their accounting department. According to her, Martin has a pattern of hiring attractive women and promoting them quickly if they're, shall we say, receptive to his advances." Frank pulled out another document, what looked like an internal company memo. "This is from 2 years ago. Harassment complaint filed by a woman named Sarah Martinez. She claimed Martin created a hostile work environment, made unwanted advances, threatened her job when she refused him. The complaint was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, and Sarah signed a non-disclosure agreement." My stomach turned. So this isn't the first time. Not even close. Rebecca thinks there have been at least 3 other women over the past 5 years. Martin's wife either doesn't know or doesn't care, and the company's been paying to keep things quiet. "What about Janelle? How long has this been going on?" Frank flipped to another page. "Based on credit card records I was able to access, legally, through public filings, it looks like the affair started about 8 months ago. That's when Martin's company card starts showing charges for expensive restaurants, hotels, jewelry stores. Always on days when your wife had client meetings, according to her social media posts. 8 months. I thought back to last summer, trying to remember if there had been signs I'd missed. Janelle had seemed happier then, more energetic. I'd attributed it to her success at work, the new clients she was landing, the promotion she'd received. The promotion she'd received from Martin. "There's more," Frank said, his voice gentle. "Your wife's been telling people at work that your marriage is basically over. According to Rebecca, Janelle's been saying you're emotionally distant, that you never talk anymore, that she's only staying for your daughter's sake." "That's bullshit. I know, but it's the story she's been telling to justify the affair. Classic cheater behavior. Rewrite the marriage history to make the betrayal seem inevitable." I stared at the documents spread across the table, each one a nail in the coffin of my marriage. "What about Martin's wife? Does she know? Alyssa Kessler? I don't think so. She's got her own successful career. She's a partner at a law firm downtown, keeps a pretty low profile, doesn't seem to pay much attention to her husband's business activities." "Maybe she should." Frank smiled grimly. "That's up to you. But if you're thinking about telling her, you should know that Massachusetts is a no-fault divorce state. Adultery doesn't usually affect property division or alimony. This isn't about money. No? Then what's it about?" I thought about that for a moment. What was it about? Revenge, justice, the simple need to make sure there were consequences for what they'd done? It's about the truth, I said finally. It's about making sure everyone knows who they really are. Fair enough. So what's your plan? I gathered up the documents, feeling their weight in my hands. I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve. That evening, I sat in my home office, a spare bedroom Janelle had helped me convert when we first bought the house, and planned my next moves like I was designing a building. Foundation first, then the framework, then the details that would make the whole structure sound. Step 1. Document everything. I had Frank's investigation, my own surveillance footage, and credit card records that showed a clear pattern of deception, but I wanted more. I wanted emails, text messages, anything that would prove premeditation and ongoing betrayal. Step 2. Legal preparation. I called a divorce attorney recommended by Frank, a sharp woman named Patricia Walsh, who specialized in high-asset divorces. We scheduled a consultation for the following week. Step 3. Financial protection. I opened a new bank account and began transferring money from our joint savings. Not enough to be considered hiding assets, but enough to ensure I could afford legal fees and a security deposit on a new place if needed. Step 4. The nuclear option. I was going to tell Martin's wife, Janelle's coworkers, and anyone else who needed to know exactly what kind of people they were dealing with. But first, I wanted to confront them directly. I wanted to see their faces when they realized their perfect little secret was blown wide open. I didn't have to wait long for the opportunity. The next Friday, Janelle announced she'd be working late again, another client emergency that required her immediate attention. I nodded sympathetically, kissed her goodbye, and watched her drive away in her silver Audi. Then I called in sick to work and followed her. Elite Events occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass building in downtown Boston. I parked across the street and waited, feeling like a character in one of those noir movies Cassie loved. At 6:30 p.m., most of the office workers began leaving for the weekend. At 7:15, the building was nearly empty. At 7:45, I watched Martin and Janelle walk out together, his hand on her lower back in a gesture that was casual and possessive at the same time. They got into his BMW and drove toward Back Bay. I followed them to the Mandarin Oriental Hotel. They walked through the lobby like they owned the place, Martin's arm around Janelle's waist. She was wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled in the kind of elaborate updo that took hours to achieve. She looked beautiful, happy, completely at ease. She looked like a woman in love, just not with her husband. I sat in the hotel bar for 2 hours, nursing a single beer and watching the elevator, waiting for them to come back down. They never did. At 10 p.m., I drove home to our empty house and checked the bedroom camera. Nothing. They were spending the night at the hotel, probably in a suite that cost more than I made in a week. I poured myself a whiskey, the good stuff we'd been saving for special occasions, and sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the life we'd built together. Wedding photos on the refrigerator, Emma's artwork from elementary school still hanging on the bulletin board, the coffee maker Janelle had bought me for my birthday 2 years ago. All of it felt like evidence of a life that had never really existed. My phone buzzed with a text message from Janelle. "Working really late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "Love you too." It was the last lie I would ever tell her. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, typical Boston spring weather that matched my mood perfectly. I'd spent the weekend reviewing Frank's evidence, memorizing every detail, every timeline, every piece of proof that my marriage was a carefully constructed lie. Janelle came home Sunday night with another story about client emergencies and venue problems, kissing my cheek with lips that had been on another man just hours before. I nodded and smiled and played the role of the trusting husband one last time. But Monday was different. Monday was the day I stopped pretending. I called Patricia Walsh, the divorce attorney, and moved our consultation up to that afternoon. Then I called my boss and told him I needed a personal day. Finally, I called Frank Torino. I want to confront them, I said. Both of them. Today. You sure about that? Once you pull that trigger, there's no going back. I'm sure. Where? Elite Events. I want to do it at their office, in front of their colleagues. I want everyone to see exactly who they are. Frank was quiet for a moment. That's going to be messy. You prepared for that? I've been preparing for this my whole life. I just didn't know it. At 2 p.m., I walked into the lobby of Elite Events wearing my best suit and carrying a manila envelope thick with evidence. The receptionist, a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings, looked up from her computer with a practiced smile. Can I help you? I'm here to see Janelle Falk. I'm her husband. Oh, her smile became genuine. She's mentioned you. Let me call her. Actually, I said, I'd like to surprise her. It's our anniversary. It wasn't, but the receptionist didn't know that. She directed me to the elevator and told me Janelle's office was on the 3rd floor, corner suite. The elevator ride felt like the longest 30 seconds of my life. Elite Events offices were exactly what I'd expected, all glass and chrome and expensive furniture, designed to impress wealthy clients. I could see Janelle through the glass wall of her office, talking on the phone and gesturing animatedly. She looked professional, successful, completely in her element. Martin's office was directly across from hers, and I could see him through his own glass wall, typing on his laptop. They were close enough to make eye contact, to smile at each other, to coordinate their lies without anyone else noticing. I knocked on Janelle's door. She looked up, saw me, and her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something that might have been fear. Adrian. She hung up the phone and opened the door. What are you doing here? We need to talk. I'm working. Can this wait until tonight? No, I said, walking past her into the office. It can't. Martin had noticed the commotion and was standing in his doorway, watching us with obvious concern. I waved at him. Martin, I called out. Perfect timing, you should hear this too. Janelle's face went white. Adrian, what are you? I opened the manila envelope and pulled out an 8x10 photograph, a still frame from my bedroom camera showing Janelle and Martin in an embrace. I held it up so both of them could see it clearly. Nice watch, Martin, I said conversationally. Rolex Submariner, right? The one you left on my nightstand 3 weeks ago. The office had gone completely quiet. I could see other employees gathering outside their offices, drawn by the obvious tension. Martin stepped into Janelle's office and closed the door behind him. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Oh, there's been a misunderstanding, all right. I pulled out more photographs, spreading them across Janelle's desk like a poker hand. But it's not mine. Janelle sank into her chair, staring at the evidence of her affair laid out in front of her. How did you? Hidden camera, I said. Amazing what you can buy at Best Buy these days. High definition, motion-activated, crystal-clear audio. Want to hear some of the highlights? I pulled out my phone and played the audio clip I'd prepared. Janelle's voice, clear and unmistakable. Adrian sees what he wants to see, and what he wants to see is his perfect little suburban life staying exactly the same forever. The silence in the office was deafening. You bastard, Janelle whispered. You recorded us without consent. In my own bedroom, I replied. Which, legally speaking, I'm allowed to do. But thanks for the concern about my methods. Really shows your priorities. Martin had recovered from his initial shock and was trying to take control of the situation. Look, this is obviously a private matter between you and your wife. Private? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You made it public the moment you brought it into my house, into my bed, into my marriage. I turned to address the growing crowd of employees watching through the glass walls. My voice was loud enough for all of them to hear. For anyone who's interested, I announced, Martin Kessler has been having an affair with my wife for the past 8 months. They've been using company time and company resources to conduct their relationship, including overnight stays at the Mandarin Oriental that I'm sure are being expensed as client entertainment. Martin's face was red with anger and embarrassment. You can't come in here and make accusations. I'm not making accusations. I'm stating facts. I pulled out Frank's investigation report. According to this private investigator's report, this isn't the first time you've had an inappropriate relationship with an employee. Sarah Martinez, ring a bell? How about the settlement your company paid her to keep quiet? The crowd outside had grown larger. I could see people taking out their phones, probably recording everything. In the age of social media, this would be all over Boston's event planning community within hours. Janelle, I said, turning back to my wife, do you have anything you'd like to say? Any explanation for why you've been lying to me for 8 months? Any reason I shouldn't file for divorce and make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are? She looked up at me with tears in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret, no love, just a cold satisfaction that the truth was finally out. I never meant for it to happen, she said quietly. It just did. Bullshit, I said. You meant for it to happen every time you lied about working late. You meant for it to happen every time you brought him into our house. You meant for it to happen every time you mocked me to your lover. I gathered up the photographs and put them back in the envelope. I'll be filing for divorce tomorrow. My attorney will be in touch about asset division and custody arrangements. And Martin, you might want to call your wife. I'm sure she'd be very interested to know how you've been spending your evenings. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Oh, and Janelle? You can keep the red dress. It looks expensive, and I'm sure Martin paid for it. Consider it severance pay. I walked out of Elite Events with the entire office watching, feeling lighter than I had in months. The hard part was over. Now came the fun part, watching their carefully constructed lies crumble into dust. The war wasn't over, but I'd won the first battle, and I was just getting started. The fallout from my office confrontation was swift and brutal. By Tuesday morning, the story had spread throughout Boston's tight-knit event planning community. By Wednesday, it was gossip fodder in the business journals. By Thursday, Elite Events was in full damage control mode. I watched it all unfold from my lawyer's office, where Patricia Walsh was reviewing the evidence I'd provided with obvious satisfaction. This is a divorce attorney's dream, she said, flipping through Frank's investigation report. Clear evidence of adultery, financial impropriety, and emotional cruelty. Plus, your wife's employer is now facing a potential harassment lawsuit. What about the assets? With this level of documented infidelity, I can argue for a larger share of the marital property. The house, retirement accounts, her car lease. We can make a case that her behavior justifies an unequal division. And custody of Emma? Your daughter's 18 and in college. Custody isn't really an issue. But if she needs financial support, we can argue that your wife's irresponsible behavior makes you the more stable parent. I signed the divorce papers that afternoon, feeling like I was finally taking back control of my life. But the real satisfaction came from watching Martin and Janelle's world collapse around them. Martin's wife, Alyssa, had apparently received my anonymous package of evidence with the cold fury of a woman who'd built her own successful career only to discover her husband was a serial cheater. According to Frank's sources, she'd filed for divorce and was demanding a forensic audit of Kessler Holdings' books. Word is she thinks Martin's been using company funds for his affairs, Frank told me over coffee. If she can prove it, he's looking at embezzlement charges on top of the divorce. Janelle, meanwhile, had been placed on administrative leave pending Elite Events' internal investigation. The company was scrambling to distance itself from the scandal, especially after 2 more former employees came forward with their own stories about Martin's inappropriate behavior. She's basically unemployable in Boston now, Frank continued. The event planning community is small, and everyone knows what happened. Her reputation is shot. I should have felt guilty about destroying 2 people's lives so thoroughly. Instead, I felt a deep sense of justice finally being served. My phone rang while I was driving home from the lawyer's office. Janelle's number. "We need to talk," she said when I answered. "I think we've said everything we need to say. Please, Adrian, just give me 5 minutes. I'm at the house." I found her sitting on our front steps, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. She'd been crying, and her usually perfect makeup was smudged and uneven. "I'm sorry," she said as I approached. "I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." I sat down beside her, not because I forgave her, but because I wanted to hear what she had to say. "Why?" I asked. "Just tell me why." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "Because I felt invisible," she said finally. "We were like roommates, Adrian. We never talked, never touched, never did anything together except manage our schedules and pay bills. So you decided to sleep with your boss instead of talking to your husband." She flinched at the crude language, but didn't deny it. "Martin made me feel special, important. Like I was more than just someone who did laundry and grocery shopping and remembered to pay the electric bill. You were more than that. You were my wife." "Was I? When was the last time you told me I was beautiful? When was the last time we went on a date that wasn't dinner at the same 3 restaurants we've been going to for years?" I thought about that and realized she might have a point. We had fallen into routines, taken each other for granted, let the daily mechanics of marriage replace the romance that had brought us together. But that didn't justify what she'd done. "You could have talked to me," I said. "You could have suggested counseling, or a vacation, or anything except betraying our marriage." I know I should have. But Martin was there, and he was interested, and it felt so good to be wanted again. She turned to look at me, her eyes red with tears. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought maybe you wouldn't find out, and I could have this one thing for myself, and it wouldn't change anything between us. It changed everything between us. I know that now." We sat in silence for a while, watching our neighbors go about their evening routines. Normal people living normal lives, dealing with normal problems that didn't involve hidden cameras and private investigators. "What happens now?" Janelle asked. "Now you move out. The divorce papers will be served tomorrow, and my lawyer will be in touch about asset division." "And us? Is there any chance?" "No," I said firmly. "There's no us anymore. You made sure of that when you brought Martin into our bed." She nodded, accepting the finality in my voice. "Can I ask you something?" "What?" "The man who confronted us at the office, that wasn't the Adrian I married. That was someone else. Someone cold and calculating and cruel." I thought about that for a moment. She was right. The man who'd walked into elite events with a folder full of evidence and a plan for maximum humiliation wasn't the same person who'd been fixing leaky pipes and leaving love notes in lunchboxes. "You created him," I said finally. "Every lie you told, every night you came home smelling like another man's cologne, every time you mocked me to your lover, you were building that person. So don't act surprised when he finally showed up." Janelle stood up, brushing off her skirt. "I'll come by this weekend to get my things. I'll be at Cassie's. Leave your key on the kitchen counter." She walked to her car, then turned back. "For what it's worth, I did love you. I still do." "No," I said. "You loved the idea of me. The security, the stability, the nice house and the steady income. But you never loved me enough to stay faithful." She drove away, and I sat on the steps of the house we'd bought together, watching the sun set over a neighborhood full of secrets and lies and broken promises. 2 weeks later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. "Martin Kessler's been arrested," Frank told me. "Embezzlement, fraud, harassment, the whole 9 yards. His wife's forensic accountant found over $200,000 in company funds used for personal expenses, including hotel rooms, jewelry, and payments to women who filed complaints." "What about Janelle?" She's been named as a witness in the case. Apparently, some of those hotel expenses were for their affair. She could be looking at charges herself if they can prove she knew the money was stolen. I hung up the phone and poured myself a drink. The good whiskey again. Because if this wasn't a special occasion, I didn't know what was. Justice, I realized, tasted a lot like 18-year-old Jameson. The final papers came through on a Friday in June. The house was mine, along with 60% of our shared assets and all of my retirement accounts. Janelle had agreed to everything without contest, probably because her lawyer had explained exactly how much worse things could get if we went to trial. She'd moved back in with her parents in Worcester, taken a job at a small catering company that paid half what she'd made at elite events. Martin was in jail awaiting trial, his marriage and business empire in ruins. I should have felt satisfied, complete, vindicated. Instead, I just felt empty. That evening, I was cleaning out the last of Janelle's belongings from our bedroom when I found a box of old photographs hidden in the back of her closet. Pictures from our early years together. Our wedding, Emma's first birthday, family vacations and holiday celebrations. We looked happy in those photos, young and hopeful and genuinely in love. I sat on the bed where I'd discovered her betrayal, looking at pictures of people who no longer existed, and wondered if I'd won or lost. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad, I heard about the divorce. Are you okay?" I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Everything's going to be fine." It was the first honest thing I'd said in months. Outside, the sun was setting over suburban Boston, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. I gathered up the photographs, put them back in the box, and carried them downstairs to the fireplace. Some bridges, I realized, needed to be burned completely before you could build something new. I struck a match and watched 20 years of marriage turn to ash and smoke, feeling like a man who'd finally learned the difference between love and habit, between trust and naivety, between forgiveness and justice. The old Adrian Falk was gone, consumed in the flames along with the photograph.